and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to show you how to build this very simple shelving unit. It's about 2.4 meters tall and the shelves are about 60 centimeters by about 35 centimeters. It's a great little shelving unit and it's going to be an absolutely massive help in the workshop. Let's get going. Now this isn't going to be particularly complicated to build. I've got a miter saw that I can borrow. Luckily the builders have kindly left the miter saw here over the weekend for me to use as long as I'm careful with it. And that's absolutely brilliant. So I've got a really nice dual miter saw to use to build this thing with. Should speed the process up. Obviously if you don't, just use a hand saw. But I'm going to be building this 2.4 meters tall, so I don't really want to be cutting everything by hand. But of course this is possible to do by hand. And then I'll be using that massive sheet of plywood that I've got, which again the builders have left because it's a big offcut. It's just some probably 6mm, 12mm ply. No, it's probably about 6mm. 6mm ply, so it's not particularly heavy duty, but I'm going to brace it and it should be really good. It should work out nicely for here. So we're going to start cutting up and measuring everything to size. Let's get going. I started out by measuring everything using my tape measure and marking out the 2x3s. I then moved over to using the miter saw. Now this was my first ever time using a miter saw and I have to say it's a really great tool, and I'm probably going to end up getting one in the coming few months. So I was using 2x3 for this project and I ended up using I think something like 8 2x3s, so it is quite a demanding project if you're going to make it the full height of one 2x3, which for me is 2.4 meters. Now of course you don't need a miter saw to make this project. You could easily use something like a normal hand saw, or my advice would be to use a tenon saw as you get a much straighter cut with a tenon saw, and of course you can use a saw to mark a 90-degree on. So we're now going to make these, which are the frames for this project. Now they're very simple to make. They require about 8 screws, something like that, and it's very simple. Line it all up, screw it together. It's as simple as that. And then we're going to attach all of the support pieces, which would actually be the bits that form the shelf, and we've got the top to lie onto it, and that's pretty much it in terms of the project. Now, I'm probably going to have to get my brother to help me put this up here because it's quite tall and it might be quite difficult, but let's get screwing it together. I then started the very long and rather tedious process of screwing all of this together. Now each shelf has 5 pieces because it's got 2 side pieces, 2 longer side pieces, and then obviously it's got the middle brace. And if you do the maths there, I've got 8 shelves, 5 pieces, that gives me 40 bits of wood to screw together. And there was an awful lot of screws that I used in this project. And now I was trying out the screws I've never used before. They're made by Axminster. I'm not sure on the exact name of them, however I'll drop a link down below in the description as they are absolutely fantastic. They're automatically countersinking, they're waxed, and they also don't require a pilot hole, which makes this project so much quicker and so much more enjoyable to do. And I've ordered 10,000 of these screws, I like them that much, so I'll definitely leave a link down below as I really do think they're really helpful. Whilst this was a very long stage, I really enjoyed it as I was listening to a podcast called Where's My Thing. If you haven't heard of the podcast, it's by Matt Estley and Rob Harvey. Now, I'd definitely recommend you have a listen of it. I will listen to it on Spotify and it's really enjoyable. Just listening to something whilst you're working out in the workshop, and you can get quite a lot more done, in my opinion, whilst listening to something, as you don't just sit there in silence. So with all of these braces now done, we're now going to cut the big plywood sheet up. Now I'm going to use a jigsaw to do this, and I've got the saw horses here. I then started the next stage, which was cutting up this big sheet of plywood. Now I actually found out this is a 9mm sheet of plywood, as I had to get some more, as you'll see later in the video, which the builders picked up for me. But this was rather difficult to cut on my own, as I had to lift it up onto these saw horses, and it wasn't the easiest to do by myself, but you know, you've got to make do with what you've got. And I have to say though, the jigsaw made very light work of cutting through this plywood, and you could use something else like a circular saw, but I just use the jigsaw as it's not that difficult to do. I then put the piece of wood onto the bracing and just screwed it all together. I used 9 screws for each piece, and I think they were something like maybe 25mm thick screws, maybe 30mm thick screws, so they had quite a lot of bite for what is a very thin piece of plywood. Progress has been made since we last did a little bit on it. I unfortunately couldn't film this because it required my mum and me to do this, and then I was also trying to hold the pieces of wood, so it wasn't exactly easy to film this, but it's pretty obvious. All you have to do is hold these upright, screw 2 of them to each side, and then use some spacer blocks to get the desired height and make sure it's level. Now 2x3s, 2x4s, 1x4s, all of these bits of timber never have a particularly good reputation of being particularly straight. And I found that was the case with these ones as well. You can see I'm using clamps here to try and push them or pull them in just to get it a bit straighter and make sure the shelves are aligned. So it's Friday afternoon now, and the builders very, very kindly went and picked up this humongous 8x4 sheet of plywood for me. It's 9mm thick, and I'm going to make the other two shelf components, and then we'll screw them into here and it will be finished. And this time I'll show you how I attach them to here, because I forgot to do that last time. So I'm going to set up the sawhorses outside and cut this probably with a jigsaw or something like that. So because I've been using this 8x4 sheet, there's going to be quite a lot of inaccuracy in the cut, especially when I'm just using this and marking it. So when you can see this, there's many ways you can remove this. One is just with a saw. If it's a little bit like, say like that, I might use the plane on it. And I'm going to show you both methods that I use. So here's my method for attaching the plywood. Simply lay it on there, make sure all four edges are as close to the edge of the piece of wood as they can be. So for me, I'm happy with that. And then I simply work my way around the corners and just screw it together. It's literally as simple as that. Nothing particularly complicated. Now I'm not bothered about a little bit of tear out on these screws. It's a shelf, it's not a piece of art. However, if you are fussed about it, you could drill a countersink. Again, like I did earlier, I screwed the piece of plywood onto the bracing, and I only had another 3 of these to do as I'd done the others earlier. Welcome to the mess in the workshop. So I'm currently on the shelf at the moment, and I'm going to be screwing this in, so I figured why not show you how to do it. Unfortunately, I left my tripod down there, so I'm going to have to bring it up, but I'll show you how I assemble it. So basically, best way to do it in my opinion is screw this down, and usually I would do it as one. However, for this panel I didn't want to, because I didn't want to lose the structural integrity of these whilst this was sitting here for a week. And now I'll attach the rest once I've screwed this. It's a lot easier if you screw the plywood onto the bracing before trying to screw it into the shelf, as it means you don't have to faff around like this. So as promised, I'm going to show you how I get these bits flush with each other. So if there's only a little bit of material to move, say about 2mm that I need to remove, most of the time I'll plane it. So I do that by standing front onto it and just take some shavings. With careful tool presentation though, or plane presentation, you can get some really nice shavings, and they're never going to be brilliant. It is plywood. So when there's a bit more of a bigger bit overhanging, I tend to saw that off. Apologies for the slightly poor lighting and slightly poor camera angles. I'm by myself up a ladder trying to do this, it's not that easy. So basically I'm now going to screw it into here. So the simple way to do that would be to do it with 2 people, it'd be a lot easier. And also I need to get this flush here. The way I do that is by using 2 clamps, one that spreads rather than pulls, and push these apart a little bit. Screw this end in, screw that end in, bish bash bosh, we're done. Then I use spacers here, so these are a bit of 2x2, and I just cut them all to the same length. No idea what the height is. And then we've got that one, which will make the top panel. So I'm going to try and film this from up here, hopefully you'll get a good angle. I then screwed the last 2 shelves in. Now these were a lot more difficult as the 2x3s, as I said, weren't particularly straight, so I just had to use the clamps until it was nice and straight. But I did get there in the end with it. It was just a bit more difficult. Well, thank you very much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. I had an absolute blast making this thing. It definitely challenged me, but I think it was worth it. And it's going to be an absolutely massive help in the workshop. It's 2.4 metres tall, and the shelves are about 60 by about 35 centimetres. So they're fairly decent sized shelves for the space that I was building it for. Now, the 2x3s weren't the straightest, so you have to do a bit of sort of putting them into the wall. You've got to try and get them as flat as you can. It's never going to be the easiest thing in the world to do. However, I got there and I'm really happy with the overall result. Thank you for watching.